So this should go without saying, but I am a huge nerd. However, I don't mean that in the socially acceptable sense of yelling at people on the internet for having a different opinion or dressing up to raise money for charity sense, but in the I get excited while browsing academic journals sense. Or to put it another way, I'm boring. Heck, even making YouTube videos acts as a thin excuse for me to dive into Project Muse or JSTOR to read essays by people who were probably better at school than I was, and most recently I started wondering about board game and video game adaptations. In particular, I wanted to know what academics were saying about the transition from digital to analog or vice versa. I wanted to learn about the kinds of frameworks and theories peoples have developed for analyzing these sorts of experiences, how different communities perceive those adaptations, and even some brief histories on different games like Risk or Monopoly. My initial research led me to the field of adaptation studies, a kind of hybrid discipline that has its origins in both film and literary criticism. This is a field born both out of the need to legitimize the academic study of literary film adaptations such as Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, and a frustration with the tendency of film critics to focus on whether a film was better than its source material. It was a lot of fun digging into the literature and exploring notions of fidelity, why people perceive certain works as adaptations more readily than others, and how adaptations can even change the way in which people look at the original work. However, adaptation studies is dominated by a focus on film adaptations to the expense of everything else. Discussions about television, comics, and games happen sparingly and almost always centered on the relationship that they have with one or more associated films, while board games are almost never talked about. Expanding my research to include game studies and other academic writing turned up the same results. Most essays focus on film and video games while board games were ignored. In fact, board games were broadly neglected outside of historical surveys or how they could be used to further education. In fact, the more I searched, the more I had this sinking feeling that board games were just an academic afterthought. But that couldn't be the case, right? Board games are older than writing, so it's impossible that no academic wrote about the same kinds of questions I had. My search foo must be too weak to find the answers I'm looking for, so I should dig deeper or start picking up ebooks that fell off a truck. And so I did, until my search led me to the most recent issue of the Velvet Light Trap, an academic journal published by the University of Texas that normally focuses on film criticism, but decided to dedicate its spring 2018 issue to games. Unfortunately, Paul Booth's editorial essay only confirmed my suspicion.
Perhaps the archives are incomplete.
If an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist.
This is mind-blowing. Almost everyone has at some point in their life played board games, whether it's learning checkers in an after-school club or learning to hate your family over a game of Monopoly. They're a wonderfully social mode of play which help us grow as individuals and bond as communities. Board games also serve an important role in fiction because which games we play and how we play them say something about us and the people we play with. This is why the Academy's disinterest in nearly a universal human experience that connects us across time and culture is like a meteorologist trying to understand the weather by choosing to ignore the clouds. It's easy to give a pass to film studies and literary criticism for never really engaging with games except when they are essential to understanding a particular movie or book, but it's much less acceptable for the nascent field of game studies. For whatever reason, academics who claim to study games tend to privilege digital games over their analog counterparts, even when franchises like Fallout, StarCraft, and XCOM have several physical adaptations. Furthermore, studies that focus on the social and community building aspects of games also ignore the physical third spaces created by local game stores and Gen Con in favor of the virtual spaces created by World of Warcraft and League of Legends. By being glued to their screens, game academics miss out on important design and historical context for critically acclaimed games such as Baldur's Gate and Final Fantasy, both of which borrow heavily in terms of mechanics and theming from Dungeons & Dragons. Even the recent loot box controversy has its roots in the distribution strategy pioneered by Wizards of the Coast. This neglect is doubly embarrassing when you take a step back and look at the long history of video game adaptations of classic games like Monopoly, Clue, and Risk. In fact, the adaptations of chess have a history which predates both Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, and new adaptations continue to be developed for modern consoles and mobile devices. If that weren't enough, millions of dollars are spent by major board game publishers like Asmodee and Wizards of the Coast in order to sculpt digital Meeples and print virtual playing cards that augment, adapt, or even promote their physical games. There's no excuse for game studies to overlook such a substantial portion of the field in favor of things that you can exclusively play on your phone, console, or PC. Ultimately, I only have control over the content I produce, so if I want to see the kind of deep dives and breakdowns of board games in the same vein as Game Maker's Toolkit or Noah Caldwell-Gervais, I'll just need to make it myself. It probably won't be nearly as good as their work, but it should hopefully provide a starting point for people interested in exploring the physical side of games. To that end, I'll be shifting the channel a bit to focus on game adaptations with a new series called Total Conversion, which will explore all the wonderful ways in which games try to adapt to different genres or material spaces. I want to start here because I think it's important to bridge this digital-analog divide, and examining how different franchises translate into new mediums is the best way to do that. I'll still produce video essays on other topics, and I'll sometimes throw in a review for whichever game I'm analyzing next, but my monthly videos should heavily focus on Total Conversion, with anything outside that series hopefully being a nice bonus for the month. So what do you think? Are these just games, man, and thinking is the problem here? Are current game studies frameworks even able to analyze board games? Will a postmodern analysis of Sonic Adventure 2 serve as a neo-Marxist Trojan horse and end Western civilization? Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.